Irish director Lee Cronin made a short film Ghost Train in 2013, which won the Méliès d'Argent accolade from the European Fantastic Film Festival's federations. The story about two childhood friends' annual payment of respect for a friend they lost during a misadventure in a malfunctioning, creepy-looking amusement ride known as the Ghost Train. For a 16 minutes long film shot in 2013 with minuscule budget, Cronin already showed his ability to send chills to unsuspecting audiences. The Hole in the Ground was the feature film's supernatural horror debut for Lee Cronin, which put him on the map for many horror fans. I will be doing a full review for the 2019 film After the Mummy. In 2020, Cronin crossed the Atlantic as he was invited to be one of the directors for an original Quibi series known as 50 States of Fright, as he took on the Washington's 13 Steps of Hell from the infamous Maltby Cemetery. It was through the development of the series that Cronin came into prominence to Sam Raimi, who also directed one of the episodes for the series. This led to Lee Cronin's being anointed as the director for Evil Dead Rise from 2023, the franchise standalone spin-off about a family living in an old, questionable apartment building before unearthing one of the volumes of the Naturom de Monto, releasing the evil sealed within, affecting everyone in the building on a stormy night when electricity got cut. The hauntingly gruesome feature complemented very well with Fede Alvarez's reboot of the Evil Dead series and brought new impetus into the franchise, giving Raimi and his team runway to make more sequels like Evil Dead Burned in 2026 and Evil Dead Wrath in 2028. Evil Dead Rise was a movie that substantially creeped me out, especially with the performance of Alyssa Sutherland and homages Lee Cronin paid to previous Evil Dead movies and other horror movies that shaped him, melded nicely with his utilization of gore. I even caught it twice in the cinema. Lee Cronin was supposed to carry on the directorial efforts in the Evil Dead sequels. Instead, he opted to work on a passion project. It was his own imagination of the lore of the Mummy, very much unlike the Universal Monster franchise, which in recent times was remembered for those comedic adventures with the likes of Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz. Oh, someone sputtered the name Tom Cruise. Well, there was that cursed Dark Universe fracas. From the start, we saw a heartwarming family car ride in Cairo, Egypt, with the father and his 3 children incessantly singing to a relentless tune in the car system to the displeasure of their humorless mother. The mother was harboring a secret in their homestead with a pyramid hidden within, and in the base of the structure like a sarcophagus with a mummified corpse. Before you thought this Egyptian family was so ingrained into their ancient culture, think again, as this was the insight to a horrible chain of events that was going to transpire. Similarly in Cairo, an American news reporter Charlie was hoping to land an illustrious job in New York, which would give him the best opportunity to relocate a family of 4, with his wife expecting another child, back to America after the whole Arab Spring had concluded. On that fateful day when Charlie received the call that he had been hoping for, everything converged into a tragic end with his eldest daughter, Kathy, had been abducted, with any chance of Charlie being able to chase down the perpetrator when he was hindered by a crazy sandstorm. Fast forward years later, the distraught family had to settle for Plan B, as the abduction of Kathy had awfully beaten the family into submission, and they could not get over her supposed demise. Trying to live their life to the fullest as a family in Albuquerque, with the youngest daughter Maud replacing her elder sister she had never seen since she was born. One day, Charlie and wife Larissa got a call from the police inspector who handled their case the day Kathy was abducted. When the Cairo police had recovered a sarcophagus from an unlikely place, and through DNA fingerprinting, it was verified that the corpse within was identified as the missing Kathy. The most incredulous part was that Kathy, despite looking like a dried up corpse who had undergone ancient Egyptian mummification, was still alive, but she was not functioning like a normal human being. The anxious parents were overwhelmed by emotions, hoping to reconcile with the daughter whose disappearance created a fissure in their relationship, to fly back to Cairo only to find a young lady, visibly older than Kathy when she disappeared, in a vegetative state, could not move on her own and could barely breathe. Kathy's skull was molded out of shape, her skin had a creepy wax complexion, and her nails were growing out of control. Despite being a breathing red flag, the couple put in all the resources they could muster to bring Kathy home, with hope to nurse her back to health as compensation for losing her from that tragic adoption. The moment Kathy returned home, scary things started escalating in a big New Mexico house with creaking wooden structure, which brilliantly added to the vibe and acoustic for the scares Lee Cronin was delivering in his rendition of The Mummy. It was not hard to find parallels between The Mummy and Evil Dead Rise. The same family unit being terrorized by an ancient curse or summoning. The same style of unraveling of the mystery in a dark room before shit hits the fan. The same noteworthy performance from an actor who sufficiently creeped us out, and in both instances started with a quiet demeanor before a full explosion of physical harm to our protagonist. The same precocious girl who was caught in the eye of the storm. The same extended family who was the first to be on the brunt of the torture. And yes, the same creatively orchestrated, unadulterated gore from a studio horror feature. I suppose the nail-cutting sequence that is not something for the faint-hearted can be measured up to the cheese grater scene from Evil Dead Rise. Aside from that, The Mummy was not weighing Cronin down to escalate the gore to the level of his earlier films. It was more effectively a demonic possession feature which played on the calculated jump scares, which still worked to scare the audiences despite everyone was anticipating for it. The prime example would be when religious abuela tried to bless bedridden Kathy, and it did not end well for her. As Lee Cronin wore his admiration for Stanley Kubrick's The Shining on his sleeves in Evil Dead Rise, the homages he paid on William Friedkin's The Exorcist was evident here as well. Of course, everyone in the audience was quick to spot the infusion of the Deadites-like possessions in the funeral wake scene. That memorable crawling in tight spaces between the walls of the house when Kathy turned feral definitely reminded me of the first Conjuring from one of the producers of this movie, James Wan. I love the detective procedurals from the Cairo Police Department, especially the story arc of Officer Zaki, who played such a crucial role in assisting the family even at the climactic end as they unearthed the ghastly secret behind the adoption of Kathy. Lee Cronin had the ability to let backdrop and location to aid in his storytelling. This was evident since Ghost Train, which I have highlighted, and I will touch on the visual that enthralled me in The Hole in the Ground. In Evil Dead Rise, the prologue at the desolated lake before putting the decrepit apartment building into center stage was insanely intriguing. In The Mummy, the house in Albuquerque helped with setting up the mood. With every layer of the spine-chilling mystery being unveiled, the house felt increasingly suitable as a stage of the various characters meeting their maker. The desert landscape of Egypt and even New Mexico was very apt for telling the story of an evil that felt most comfortable with sand. The coyotes, which was a normal sight in the place where the family lived, was a nice touch, especially how Cronin incorporated it into the story, perhaps as a replacement for an Egyptian jackal. In Evil Dead Rise, we had a relatively unknown Australian cast who blitzed the screen with their excellent performances. The likes of Jack Rayner, Laia Costa, and May Melamy was definitely not household names, and one thing for sure, their performances were rooted to the characters who had to endure the rollercoaster ride of emotions, and none was remotely distracting. The pick of the lot had to be Natalie Grace as Kathy, who, like Alyssa Sutherland, gave the tour de force in the memorable antagonistic role which the movie can bank upon. Young actress Grace has an unforgettable face which helped with manipulating the characters with the twists and turns of her demeanor, and effectively chilled me through the process. It was only through doing this review that I realized that the name of the grandmother character is Carmen Sandiego. Perhaps she had hoped to disappear to another corner of the world like her namesake. Lee Cronin's The Mummy was a horror movie event I had been building up for the year of 2026. In no way that it was disappointing, and the 2 hours long movie was sufficiently captivating with the nuance in the scares and the part with unraveling of the ancient lore. It was still hard not to dissociate it from Cronin's previous film Evil Dead Rise, and the comparisons just came imminently. This was an interesting take on The Mummy, which of course the filmmakers are very prompt to distance it from the franchise we knew. I am awarding Lee Cronin's The Mummy a 7.5 out of 10. The Hole in the Ground was a supernatural horror written and directed by Lee Cronin, which immaculately made use of the dreary nature of an Irish woods, and when you find a massive sinkhole there, it was time to bail out. Single mother Sarah and young son Chris moved to an unnamed Irish countryside to resurrect their lives after a seemingly ugly divorce. Chris was not receptive to make new friends in school at the onset and had other mental inhibitions and that distinct pickiness on food, like not being a fan of shredded cheese. One day, upon picking up Chris from school, they found an old lady without a sound mental capacity roaming on the road, causing Sarah to make an audacious swerve of her car, nearly leading to a deadly accident. An old lady likely suffering from dementia aside, finding a sinkhole the size of a large swimming pool at your doorstep put Sarah's fear receptors into overdrive. Things got more unhinged for Sarah when she was woken up by a loud banging noise one night before finding Chris missing, as she suspected he had ran out and got lost in the woods. Just as she was losing hope of finding Chris, he reappeared in the house like he had never left. After being told the old lady by the name of Noreen had killed her own son after claiming he was not her real son, Sarah and Chris were petrified to find Noreen coming to pound them, warning Sarah that Chris was not her real son. This was the start of things spiraling out of control for Sarah when something ominous lurking in that wretched sinkhole was capable of turning the lives of Sarah and Chris topsy-turvy. As addressed, Lee Cronin is dexterous to use the landscape and environment to tell his stories. The sinkhole, digged in the middle of the sea of trees, can be a sight to be behold, yet on the flip side, can be truly disengaging just to look at it. The climatic end with the claustrophobia within the underground tunnels, before the creatures come crawling with evil intentions, was an effective backdrop to effectively dishevel the characters and audiences alike. The hole in the ground was a subtle form of storytelling before Lee Cronin cranked up the manic set pieces with his Hollywood big studio productions. That said, the somber nature of the storytelling give greater significance to the sudden acts of violence shown by the characters. The travails of Sarah and Chris harken back to the maternal horror theme I have done earlier this year. In fact, the prominence of a mother's incessant concerns of the safety and welfare of children was ubiquitous for all Cronin's movies so far. I loved how Cronin was planting seeds with regards to Chris' personalities and dislikes that threw the audience off the stench before Sarah became suspicious of the ongoings herself. Cronin made use of some classic horror techniques in this formative stage with things like strobing lights and a tracing torchlight in the dark woods as audience is bracing for a likely jump scare. The part with Sarah's arm being grabbed by an entity in the underground tunnels before the revelation of the form the entity had taken was awfully creepy. I certainly enjoyed the performance of Irish actress Sienna Kerslake in the role of the distraught mother Sarah. She had a face well suited for a horror movie and hope she will be cast in more horror films in years to come. Young James Quinn Markey had some physical resemblance to Joel Haley Osment, but I was glad he did not play things up dramatically as Chris. James Cosmo, who we have talked about in my review of The Morrigan, had a key role as the husband of Noreen, herself brilliantly cast with Finnish actress Kati Ottinen. Cosmo's character provided the important conduit to relay the fear Noreen suffered with their deceased son James, and I was glad he did just that and nothing else. To be honest, I struggled through The Hole in the Ground. Not that it was an awful film, I just find everything to be too soft-spoken and suppressed, and it took a lot of time to get things going with the thread. The part with Sarah revealing Chris as a doppelganger was great, with a throwback to a silly antics the mother and son would pull from time to time. It was evident from this early movie that Cronin had what it takes to tell a solid story, especially one he had created himself. The Hole in the Ground is a 7 out of 10 for me. Perhaps not watching it at the end of a long work day might help. As I look forward to more intriguing horror films from Lee Cronin, please subscribe to this channel to take this journey with me. Don't forget to like and share this video. My last review was an in-depth look into the history of horror filmmaking in my own country of Singapore, with reviews from Kong Tao, from Yong Chun Ling and Goh Pek Chiak, and Kelvin Tong's The Maid. As a parent, I could empathize with the care and concern you had for your child under any circumstances, but when you see them gobbling down a rat in the attic or savaging on a spider on the ground, it is time to bail out of that responsibility.